I will. So today I'll give you a little background on the Elkhorn Slough Restoration, Tidal Marsh Restoration Project, and highlight the some of the trade-offs if you if you want to maximize your near-term carbon storage. And so this really touches on what Laura was talking about and others throughout the symposium today, which has been great. Thank you so much. It's been really wonderful to hear all these talks. But we're talking about here, it really is. We thought a lot about getting your marsh, being resilient to climate change, getting your marsh really high in the tidal frame, and that trade-off with carbon sequestration. So I will get into that as we go along. So wanted to bring up the ESNR team. There's folks in here that you're very familiar with, Kirsten Lawson and Andrea and Charlie Anderson as well. Have been working on this project for years, and of course, funding that went into it. So where is Elkhorn Slough? It's here in the middle of Monterey Bay, 50 miles south of San Francisco Bay. It is a 7-mile long coastal embayment that empties into a branch of the Monterey Bay Canyon. And of course, everybody knows how important estuaries are. So I think I'll move to this very high value system, both ecologically and economically, tourism that we have in the area. And some of you know Beth Watson. She worked as a graduate student and a postdoc doing paleoecology, and her work revealed that here in the system there were extensive ancient marshes with high rates of carbon sequestration. And so, um, going back in time, they were able to kind of reconstruct what the estuary looked like in the 1870s through the maps that we have. The blue is water, so this is looking down on the estuary. Blue is water, brown is mud, green is marsh. And this sort of shows how much we've lost. 50% of our marshes were lost primarily due to diking and draining. So moving forward, you see how much was converted into mud. So from a blue carbon perspective, much carbon function in this estuary was already lost. And the estuary has a legacy of diking in a system with low sediment supplies. We don't have a lot of sediment coming in, and it has subsidence. And here you can see just this bathtub ring around the outside. So a lot of the areas that are subsided are too low for marsh to be sustained. And they're not really built up over time since we are low on sediment. The river was diverted from the estuary, and so we've lost a lot in the past, and unfortunately, the marshes that remain really are looking challenged. So they're already drowning now, and they will not survive much sea level rise. So what do you do when you're faced with this? And here in Elkhorn Slough, I think a number of folks are familiar with the Tidal Wetland Program, where we have a very large collaborative process with decision makers are the agencies that have jurisdiction over the slough. A lot of scientists that provide input, and then our community stakeholders as well. And so one of the planning processes for this, we looked at a number of different options. One, of course, conserving the existing tidal marshes. If possible, we really want to try and protect our marshes from different stressors like eutrophication, algal mats. But sea level rise modeling suggests we will not be able to protect our marshes in place beyond about 40 or 50 centimeters of sea level rise. So option 2, facilitating migration to higher ground. That's a challenge here in Elkhorn Slough because we have relatively steep hills next to the marsh. And so we're left again with this little bathtub ring around the outside in many of the estuary. Third option, looking at thin layer sediment addition. And as has been mentioned before, this can work if you have a regular source of sediment, like nearby channel dredging. Not really the case for us, so we didn't do this. We went with this thick soil addition, and so that's the project I'm talking about here, and it's down here in the southern edge of this. And this was again a diked and drained area, and so looking at it with a digital elevation model, this is the area. So again, blue is water, brown is mud, green is marsh, and then this like rust area up on top here is really high marsh. And so to show you what we did, this was after restoration. We really brought that marsh way up into the tidal prism at the high end of the tidal prism. And so This is showing 50 centimeters of sea level rise, and it shows that this marsh here that we've restored could be one of our last marshes in the system with sea level rise. So this is back to us is building what a climate ready marsh looks like. And so you can do it. Here's a picture of it here behind me as well. And we also built in along the interior migration, so gentler slope that are upland plants now, but will become marsh with forest. So if you build it, you'll come, they will come. Salicornia is our dominant marsh plant. And while we did do some experimental planting, we largely relied on it, marsh recruiting on its own. And so let's look at the blue carbon function. So we did intensive blue carbon monitoring. We sampled the restoration site before and after. We had degraded control sites that had remained unrestored, and we had reference sites. And we also looked across different habitats, mudflat, salt marsh, grassland, and um, and then we looked at multiple metrics, which I think is really important. Above ground collected biomass, monitoring accretion rates with feldspar horizons, all the things that everybody has talked about already today. And so in the first growing season, the construction of the first phase of the marsh in 2018, colonization began, and it continues, of course, today. But it's what we've seen from our monitoring is that this is a relatively slow process at such a high elevation. And so this is our carbon storage here. We have our restored marsh, high marsh, bare ground, and then our reference sites, grassland, high marsh, and mudflat. And the above ground carbon storage will be lower at our restoration site for a while. And this is, of course, because the plants are still small, because they were set really high in the tidal frame, and it takes a lot longer to colonize. And so when you've got this lower carbon and not as many plants, you're not going to get as quick carbon storage. And it's a lot lower than the reference sites. So our feldspar marker horizons showed that accretion rates of sediment were higher, of course, in more tidally inundated areas, which we expect. And of course, also as people mentioned before, mudflats are accreting the most, well, the most in our situation compared to our reference site, and compared to our restored area. So, but we do have something new we're looking at, as mentioned. A few folks have eddy covariance towers. So, Adina Payton from UC Santa Cruz has put in 3 eddy covariance towers in the system, and we're getting a little bit different look now compared to what we found through our other monitoring. And that, of course, is because we're measuring the gas on a continuous scale. Before, we were just snapshots in time, so you don't get all that seasonal variation. And a lot of variation in there. And so we have carbon storage in our reference site, and compared to this yellow right here, compared to our restored site and our degraded site. So you can see there is some carbon storage going on, but the real story here is that our degraded sites that are degraded into mudflats are actually producing quite a bit of methane that are really offsetting that. And so that was a really a good argument for doing this restoration of these degraded sites. And here's our greenhouse gas budget um, here. So you've got degraded sites or our reference sites, they're storing a lot of carbon. And our restored site is actually, even though it doesn't have a lot of vegetation yet, is doing better than our degraded site. So that's really great news after just a few years. So reference marshes are outperforming our reference site. And yeah, so I think this is good. And so, but one of the things is that again, our data is showing that there's really relatively slow rate of gaining this blue carbon function. And I think, you really have to, I think for us, so we're looking at this balance, right? Because between this, we have a really high march that's taking time, and you just have to plan ahead and you have to be patient as you wait for the blue carbon benefits to manifest. And this is really the crux of what I want to talk about, that this trade-off between carbon function now versus your future climate resilience of restoration. So in these tidal channels here, they're chock full of pickleweed, and they're doing great, and they're storing a lot of carbon. And our higher levels up here, tops of the marsh, are not recruiting and not colonizing as it's a much harsher environment. But if we are putting our marshes in the slough, they're going to be lost. And so we really focusing on building our marshes for tomorrow and building in that future climate resilience with these marshes here. And so just to quickly recap, biking led to extensive loss of marsh and decrease but not total loss of blue carbon function. We can build it, as you know, we can replace the degraded wetlands. And one of the things we think is really important for the blue carbon monitoring is it should include multiple measures, habitat types, and management histories, as a lot of people have shown today. Plan ahead, be patient, take care of your existing marshes because it'll be a long time until stored marshes really achieve their blue carbon function. And this is true for marshes that are migrating as well, because as they migrate, they're reestablishing themselves and they're resequestering that carbon and sort of this virgin. And again, at the edge where they're starting to be found, you're losing that blue carbon that's in there. It's being released into the system. So I think I got through that in record time. Any questions?
Holly, I think there's a couple questions in the.
Yeah, there's some questions that have come in through the chat. If you've got any more, feel free to put them into the Q&A for Monique. Monique, what is the predicted sea level rise at your tidal channels, and when do you predict they may be lost? And do you have plans to restore degraded sites in the future?
So we don't, as we all know, the models are somewhat unpredictable. Depends. There's a lot of different variables, and so we don't predict in terms of time. What we can do is tell you what will happen when we have 50 centimeters, 100 centimeters, 150 centimeters of sea level rise. So we've purposely stepped back from trying to identify a timeline. We do follow Ocean Protection Council guidelines when we're trying to do the restoration we're doing in terms of how much we want to anticipate that our marsh will, the length of time and we anticipate it'll last. We do plan on doing additional marsh restoration. We are tackling a really interesting one. You can see behind me, we have the main north-south line of the railroad that runs through the middle of the estuary. And after that's built, a road, you know, quite a bit, was built actually below current sea level. And so we're trying to restore the degraded marsh in between that area. And so that's interesting new challenges that we'll be working on over the next few years.